Hello, adventurers. My name's Tyler.
And I'm Richard.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing Worlds Beyond Numbers children's adventure and the benefit of a Session Zero campaign. Welcome to True Strike.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. We are back in the studio to discuss Session Zero campaigns, not just Session Zero, how they impact your games and how you can improve and change your games using them.
Yeah, I like to think of today's session as a discussion, a genuine conversation between Richard and I, because both of us are in the throes of Worlds Beyond Numbers' current campaign, The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, and they did something super interesting with this, where they started everything off with a, like Richard said, a Session Zero campaign of sorts. I believe it was like 8 episodes or something like that.
Yeah.
Where they played their characters as children and got to meet each other through different backstories and stuff, and then spend a summer together and really bond and get to know each other on a personal level well before rolling initiative and jumping into combat and stakes were really high. They just got to enjoy life as a child. And now going forward past the children's adventure into the main game, how deeply connected these characters feel. And that's something I had never thought of before.
Yeah, it's a very unique situation, and it was kind of a surprise because we went into Worlds Beyond Number, at least I did, not really knowing what to expect. We had our ideas of what it was going to be. Is it going to be like a very story-heavy, plot-driven thing, or if, not so much combat, or if any combat at all? And then we got hit with the children's adventure as like the kind of opening to it, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. and then I started listening to it, and I was like, this is such a cool concept.
Yes.
And it's not one that I had ever heard anybody do before. It's not necessarily something that's applicable in this I would say package, because not everybody wants to reenact their characters as children or has the opportunity to be like, oh, we all knew each other growing up as children. Obviously, you could totally write that narrative in any kind of game that you want to play. But for this specific one, the children's adventure really showed us something that could be done, which was the idea of the Session Zero campaign, not a Session Zero game. Mm-hmm. So this is the idea that I had never done, and I've never done a campaign where we had a Session Zero campaign where we played multiple games establishing these characters, well before they actually do something. I guess some people could say like a Session Zero campaign could be like your starter campaign, right? Sort of.
Yeah.
Because like some of the starter D&D modules can sometimes feel, I guess, like a kind of an intro into Dungeons and Dragons. So maybe they kind of feel like a Session Zero campaign, but not really.
Yeah. Because something like that, you really are still just diving into Dungeons and Dragons proper.
Yeah.
It's just not as long of an arc.
Yeah, it's just a little shorter of an arc.
But I
guess that's really where you kind of got to decide where the line is. Like, mm-hmm. what are you considering a Session Zero campaign versus a starter game?
My line personally is a starter game. Your characters are still or are created. You're Jack the Whipper, and you're a fighter with 2 whips. And this is my character. These are my stats. This is what I do. I may only be level 1, but I'm really good at whipping things. Whereas if you wouldn't be Jack the Whipper as a 10-year-old, you'd just be Jack.
Jack who runs around with 2 sticks.
Yeah.
Whacking things.
Yeah.
He's got a vine.
Jack the Sticker.
Yeah, Jack's got vines.
And you're going around and you're not getting into fights with kobolds and goblins when you're 10. you're whipping a goat. You're trying to get the cows into the field. You're
Well, see, I guess that's the discussion there, is whether or not your campaign 0 necessarily has to be children, and I think that's the idea.
That's a good point.
Yeah, where we're talking about this from that aspect, because the children's adventure was so unique.
Yes,
because we're dealing with these 3 characters. I keep wanting to say the line "witch in the wardrobe,"
the wizard, the witch, and the
wild one,
yes,
who did know each other as children.
Mm-hmm.
And the children's campaign, without going into heavy spoiler territory, because we don't want to go over the entire thing. Because if you haven't listened to it, strongly suggest you go listen to it, because it is a lot of fun. Now, to get access to the children's adventure,
you do have to join their Patreon.
Have to join the Patreon.
It is Worlds Beyond Number on Patreon. It's $5 a month. Super worth it, especially because the campaign 0 essentially is so short. You could get through that in a month. And this is more than worth the $5 to listen to it.
Yeah, and if you were to listen to, just say, like the first 2 episodes of actual Worlds Beyond Number, so not the children's campaign, it's a good campaign, and it's a lot of fun, and these are really super interesting characters. You don't have to listen to the children's adventure. You could jump right into that.
Right.
But man, what you get out of this children's adventure is worth the entry fee.
Absolutely. And the main campaign is publicly available. You can find that anywhere podcasts are found. No worries there. It's just the children's adventure you need. It's behind the paywall a little bit. But yes, there's so much. I don't know how else to.
Yeah, like I said, we don't want to go into spoilers about it, but essentially what they did was they took these 3 characters and they introduced them kind of one at a time as they met each other, right?
Yes.
As children. So you started off the adventure with one of the children, and then eventually the second one joins in. We get the 2 of them interacting, and then the third one comes in, and we get the 3 of them interacting together. And then we go through a period of time with these 3 children growing up with each other and going on these little adventures that are not nearly as high stakes as what Dungeons and Dragons would consider.
Right.
They're not running with full stats either.
Oh no.
So yeah,
they were earning a lot of that as they went.
They're running almost no skills, no abilities. And they're learning them as they go.
Yes, and some of them they were able to choose as they hit certain milestones during the campaign 0.
Yeah. And
they were able to pick ones that made sense in the moment for what they were doing. And I'm spending a lot of time outdoors and exploring. I think I'm going to be proficient in nature. That's cool, and that makes sense. And they all got to develop these core moments in their character's history that tied so seamlessly together that they can call upon all of this as adults, as their characters are adults. And it makes these characters feel like they truly care and love for each other.
Yeah, and not even that, but they also make them more dimensional, like completely.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Because you have that bond. They make them feel like they really fit together, but then they also feel like a more developed character themselves as well.
Right. And these aren't just 3 adventurers who got put together in a team and are off to do the thing for good because they have to.
Which isn't bad.
No, I mean, it's a game. At the end of the day, it's a game, so if that's what gets the story going, that's what gets the story going. But episode 1 of the game of the Wizard, the Witch, the Wild One proper, there's some stakes that are established that are huge. It's a really big deal, and it's a riveting story out the jump. And I think if all you listen to was WW, you'd still enjoy it. But coming from this children's adventure straight into it, oh man, it's big.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's huge for a lot of different reasons. And one of the biggest things that you would notice if you did listen to the children's adventure and then you jump into their main campaign is that, like Tyler said, they do use a lot of this time in the children's game to develop these characters and to make them incredibly deep characters, as well as their connections to each other. And then the next part of that coin is you look at the actual game. So the session 1 of the actual campaign, now they're all older, so they're no longer children, and they've spent time apart, significant time apart. So now you have these characters that are coming back together, but they're different people.
Absolutely.
Because
They've grown up.
They've grown up and they have different ideals
Yes.
and different beliefs that are different from when they were children, because that's what happens when you become an adult.
Yeah.
The stuff that you thought was cool when you were 10 isn't so cool when you're 20, and the beliefs that you had when you were younger don't necessarily align with your current reality. And it makes for a very interesting dynamic in the new story, because you have people that have changed over time, but you don't lose all those core things that happen to you. So like those, neat moments, those memories that they established in the children's adventure, all that still exists, but now you have that on top of what these characters are. And if you were to wipe the children's campaign complete, I don't think it would have the same effect. I think that these characters are vastly different than any other character that we have seen in a D&D live play, because of the fact that they have so much more that has been done to them as far as growth from a younger age. And I've listened to a lot of live plays and actual plays, and so have you. I don't know if you agree with that sentiment, but I feel like these three characters, like right off the jump, and it's not just because I already had 8 episodes with these characters to make them feel more real. I think that it's because of the way that the children's episode was handled, or the children's adventure, my bad. You get so much more from these characters.
I do agree. And I think back, you mentioned, now I'm going to reference Critical Role specifically here twice. You've got Ashton and Fresh Cut Grass from Campaign 3, who they've known each other for a set amount of time. They've got a little bit of history. All of this kind of comes from, hey, we're going to introduce our characters at the same time. We know each other. And then throughout episodes, you throw back a little bit. Like, oh, we've known each other from this and this and this. And it's all telling you. It's not showing you it necessarily.
Yeah.
It's this is things that we've done. And it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, you guys know each other. And then to a much greater extent, you've got Vexalia and Vax'Aldon, and they are twin brother and sister. Huge connected backstory, everything, with the Trinket the Bear and everything, but similar, where it's all told through flashbacks, and then throughout the course of Campaign 1, really push the fact that we love each other, we care for each other, we're brother and sister. Now, these characters are bonded, and they create new bonds, but you never got to really see it.
Yeah.
As a listener, if you were a player, you wouldn't get to play it. You could get together with your friend, and me and Richard could get together. We could talk to each other like, hey, I'm making this character. I'm going to be a ship captain. You're like, cool. I want to be a crewmate of ship. Okay, cool. What did we do together? Are we on the same ship? Are we doing this? And we show up to game 1, and we've done all these things, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's fun. We've got ties. We'll reference each other, et cetera. But if we got to sit down and we're gonna start as, I'm 17. I ran away from my household, and I just want to get away from town. And I hopped on the first boat I could sneak on, and he's an 18-year-old kid who's the son of the captain, and he's already on this ship, and we get to spend the next 7-8 mini sessions getting to we're young. Neither of us are skilled. We're not fighters. We don't know. We can't wield a blade. We're one of us is learning magic. Maybe just get to actually narratively let this flow and take its course over a few hours, versus just sitting in a room over a cup of coffee and telling each other
and
what we think
writing down
we would bond
notes of what our bonds were.
Yes. Speaking of bonds and flaws, in a much shorter version, and this is where we separate session 0 versus session 0 campaign. We had our session 0 for Curse of Strahd, and we did get everybody in here, and over the course of a couple hours, bring everyone to a location, and then kind of do a time skip of sorts where we just let everybody kind of say things that happened, and everybody just kind of had to work on it together, and give input across the board, and then that was still fun. And there are things where everybody can reference, like, oh yeah, I don't like this thing about your character, or you and me did do that really cool thing that one time. But if we had set up 3 or 4 sessions to have actually in game dedicated a couple hours to being in that school, would that have been more immersive? Would you have felt even more connected to the other characters before you were actually thrown into the world of Barovia and your lives are in danger?
Absolutely. Like, if, best case scenario, it would have been great to have an actual session 0 campaign of all of our characters just in that school for an extended period of time, and learning the abilities that we would eventually know and have as mainstays through our time at that school. And you have more of an identity with that character the longer that you spend with it. And we're not even talking about like having combat or anything like that. This could just all be narrative driven stuff, which is what most of the children's campaign was.
99% of it.
Yeah, there was
narrative.
like very few pieces of combat in there, and they were all ridiculous combat for the most part, with the exception of like one that was still ridiculous, but wasn't, there wasn't like super duper crazy heavy combat. There was just kind of like these narrative combats that happened. And I think that, it would have been amazing to have that session 0 campaign before Strahd. I think that what we did was a really good substitute for a session 0 campaign. And I enjoyed that so much that I want to see it in like every game. Like moving forward, I would not be disappointed to see something like that happen in every campaign moving forward. And now having heard the children's campaign, and then having done the baby session 0 campaign thing that we did, which was one game, so I can't really call it a campaign. But seeing how that worked and seeing the children's adventure, I would love to have something similar to the children's adventure. I think it's such a great idea because it helps you build these identities for these characters that you're going to establish and you're going to play for a long time. And it's never a bad thing to have more character development.
Right.
And I think it's a really cool way to get a lot more character development. And like I said, I would have loved to play out all of our school year, even if it was just 1 year at school, 2 years at school. We could have made that into a, a 7-session game.
That is something very interesting to me, because this is the first time I ever ran a real session 0. And I kind of tweaked it, tried to make it my own, like I said, taking some inspiration from you running Alice and stuff like that. And I had a wonderful time. I thought it went great. As the DM, I loved it because a lot of it I got to just sit back and listen to you guys tell a story from these things that had happened. But now, post children's adventure and stuff, I would have really loved to have ran this longer version, have done 3 episodes. Hey guys, we're gonna meet up for 3 weeks, and each session is going to be us exploring, time before Strahd. I would have absolutely, if I could go back and change that, I would have done that.
Yeah, and I think it would have been great.
Yeah,
like I would have loved it, and I think the idea of doing it that way will also change the way that you build characters sometimes.
Yes.
And it actually happened in the children's adventure too, because you have these characters where they're building them and they're doing it kind of on the fly. So like you had mentioned before, where they're all like, oh, I'm enjoying my time outside. Nature seems to be my thing. I want to take proficiency in this. And I think that it allows you to, I don't want to say that it strays away from min-maxing, because that's not really what I'm trying to say. But I think it would allow you to build a character that is maybe not the best version of that character, but is more realistic.
Yes, you're building an organic, believable character.
Yeah.
Versus looking at a piece of paper and getting the highest stats. I think we were on the right when you were mentioning the min-maxing, because whether we intentionally do it, we don't usually make weak characters on purpose. We are like, okay, I'm a charisma caster. I'm going to put my highest score at charisma. And, I'm a barbarian. I want strength to be up there, and constitution and dex. And the fact that 2 characters from Children's Adventure ended up taking observant as a feat.
Yes.
because of story reasons.
Yeah, because of story beats. Exactly.
That would have never happened.
Yeah.
On
Nobody.
the character
Yeah,
sheet.
you don't look at your thing when you're building your character, even for your your session 0, and like automatically just try and pick a feat that sounds kind of neat, but is going to intentionally gimp your character.
Yeah.
People aren't really going to do that. It's just not human nature to do that. Now, in the heat of in the middle of like playing your character, right, and doing all these things, like you said, you get to that situation where observant makes sense, and then you take it because of a story beat, and it just works so well. It's something that you wouldn't think that you would do, and that you would do in a story kind of a situation.
Yeah, I did. Well, there's one thing Brennan did that was interesting as well, where he had everyone roll their stats out the gate. Before you ever hear about the Children's Adventure while making the characters, you roll your 3d6, and it's 3d6 for some of them. This is where it gets really interesting. You got to choose, I think it was like 2 stats, and you got to roll 3d6, and the third one you like kept to the side, right? You'd write down the number of what it could be.
What it could be,
essentially.
potentially.
And the rest, you would just roll 2d6, and you had whatever it was. And this is where your stats as children. And then throughout the campaign, as you were getting stronger and better and such like that, every once in a while at story beats, he'd have them roll another dice, and if it was one of the ones that they had stored that extra dice off to the side, if they rolled lower than that on this final attempt, they could use that one instead. The other ones, you're like, oh, I only get one more die. Like I had the 2. I don't have a backup on this one. If I roll a 1, my intelligence is an 8. Like,
it just is what it is.
Like, yeah. So that was also interesting because it added like stakes for all the characters at any time. Like, oh, we're just dancing around a campfire having a great night. Everybody go ahead and just roll me one more of your stats. It kept everybody like, oh man, oh, you know what? I'm feeling good. I'm gonna roll my intelligence right now. I'm a wizard, and I need a 6. I'm gonna roll this right now. I'm feeling great.
Yeah, because I'm feeling like it's gonna be the roll. This is gonna be the roll.
And that was fun. That you didn't even need that. That was fun. But like the idea that yes, you weren't an adventurer yet. You're gonna have low stats, and the fact that was even worked in, where it wasn't just you're gonna have 2d6 for stats, and then when we go to the big kids league, then we're gonna go ahead and roll our next one. They threw that in there too, just to keep everything going and like keep up the pace, and I don't know, that was fun too.
Yeah, just generally speaking, it was an interesting take on how to do things. And like I said, I didn't really know what to expect when I started listening to the Children's Adventure, and it was cool. It was that weird like innocence thing, I guess you'd say.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because you're like I said, the stakes aren't really high here. There's like situations where we're rolling dice to feed a goat, and to see how the goat is going to react.
But even then, the stakes don't seem as high to the characters, but also their backgrounds are so incredibly deep. And you got to like you mentioned, at a certain point they grow up, and it's been so many years, but you get to tell the story of what formed you, right? Like I am 9 years old, and this traumatic thing has just happened to me, or this amazing thing has happened to me. And now it's been a couple days or a week later. How am I processing this? And then at the end of this year, the end of this summer, I move on. And then it's 10 years later. Who am I now? Yeah. Based on this moment, followed by getting to really know these characters, followed by a large chunk of time and life progressing as it does, and then meeting up again. There's so much room in there to change.
Exactly. There's just so much in there to decide how you're going to react to things and how you're going to be and what kind of person you are nowadays. It's very unique. I think that the challenge there is that what we keep referring to as a children's adventure is just that. It's a children's adventure. So not everybody is going to want to play a game as children.
However,
but there are different ways to approach it, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, let's say we were pirates. 18, 19. We're not children. We're just not experienced.
Yeah.
Yet.
Yet.
This is where we're crewmates. We're not the captain. I'm not proficient with a long sword. You're not out there making your own ammo for your pistols yet. But it doesn't mean you don't get to know the guy on the ship that does. And I don't work my way up to first mate and then one day take over after the captain's killed in a siege or something. Like, there's story moments that can happen as our characters progress naturally and learn things. Maybe we're on an island one day. We're not skilled. We're out on an island, helping the crew. They're looking for something. We stumble across a map and we don't tell anyone. We keep this to ourselves. It's our secret. 15 years later, this is the story beat. You and me are out there looking for the One Piece or something. and this is what's really got the ball rolling for this campaign. And it's something we found in our backstory. But now, instead of just, mine and Richard's character, we found this map when we were younger. No, this is played out, and we're gonna be able to reference in conversation and in our memories, like, oh, you had to pass a deception check to lie to the captain, and you failed, but the captain didn't call you out. That little, you'll never know if the DM never brings this up. God, there's so much to that.
Yeah. So I guess that's the question there is, how do you design your session 0 campaign to be just that, a session 0 campaign, and not just an opening campaign? Because you do have stuff like, look at Critical Role Season 1, right? We don't know everything that happened in the games leading up to, right? Because of the home game. So you're kind of almost, when you're talking about this and you're describing it, you're kind of almost describing that kind of a situation. You have that home game. So they came into the first parts of, Critical Role, which I'm sure you watched, and a lot of you probably did watch. They all had stories. Right. So they all had these stories. They all knew these things. They all had things that happened to them, which we know now because of like the comic books and stuff like that. Right. So we do know some of what happened there. But that's the difference, is that wasn't a session 0 campaign, so to speak, not in the way that we're kind of, talking about it. It was more of this is our first game. This is where our, characters get established and everything like that. So I think what we're talking about here then would be the distinction between playing a game, which is just a standard campaign where these people are meeting each other for the first time, versus a more organic way of learning your skills and or abilities.
Yes, in my mind, if I'm going to break this out, it's setting up the first meeting of these characters at a younger point in their life, because time has to pass for improvements to be made. It doesn't have to be children. It could be months. It could be years. Something has to have happened, and it has to, make sense in that way. It also needs to be mechanics light. To me, this is my interpretation. I don't need you to worry as much about combat. I don't need you to worry as much about these checks and these saving throws, and because you're probably not going to have a lot of this yet. You're developing these skills. And if I'm running it, I want everyone to progress, like you said, organically in a narrative fashion that makes sense. And to me, that's my focus, is telling a story and writing a shared backstory together at the table with, the rules light, some mechanics to keep the flow going and constrain it into the game that it is part of, and then really dive into it afterwards.
Yeah.
What's your interpretation?
I think you're right. I think that it's got to be very narrative, but I do think the mechanics have to exist. Now, combat, not necessarily, but I do like combat being there. But I think that you do have to have some sort of mechanics there, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you're telling a collective story where just everything that you say happens, right? Because then I think it's going to get a little bit boring. Sure. Because you get to the point where you're like, yeah, and then this is when I climbed to the top of the tree, and then I jumped from the tree to the barn, and I climbed through the window. and unlock the door. End
Oh,
of
sure.
story.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
No, I want it to be like, okay, well, I climb this tree and I'm gonna jump from the tree to the barn to the window, and you're all
I'm
like, oh, but you're gonna have to roll me a check. And remember, your total dex right now is like a 7 because you are just, a dude. You aren't this heroic adventurer. So this jump is going to be challenging. Now, this is a jump that for, level 1 actual campaign session 1 game character can make, right? Because it's just like a jump. I'm a hero, I'm the hero of this adventure.
Right.
I can jump from this branch.
It's only
to
5
that.
feet.
Yeah, it's 5 feet, whatever. But no, you have that mechanic because you are not a skilled adventurer yet. So you do have that, well, am I going to make it? And then if you don't make it, now we have a whole new narrative and we have a whole new thing that's happened here. I didn't clear the jump. I bounced off the side of the wall of the shed, and I don't get to go through and unlock the door for you to let you into the barn.
Yeah. But that's a really fun callback later when your character's the rogue and you flash cut to, it's so many years later and you're like, oh, don't worry, I'll get the door. And one character like looks down at the ground, he looks back up, and you've got the door open from the other side, and you're like, got it, let's go.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So yeah.
I just had to hop off the tree real quick, a quick dex check.
Yeah,
I got a
fine.
+8 to that, and then I'm right in the window. Lockpick, don't worry, I got expertise in lockpicking. We're in, baby. And I'm like, how'd you learn that?
Well, you see. But yeah, so I do think that you do have to have some mechanics there. So it it can't just be, all narrative because I said, those mechanics are what drive D&D as a core, right?
Yeah.
Is the randomization of things, like not knowing if everything that you do is going to actually happen the way that you want it to happen. Combat light for sure. I don't think that combat needs to play a huge role. And if it did, it doesn't have to be necessarily high stakes combat. Right?
I think that's the biggest thing.
I think that's one of the things. And actually a good example of that is session 0 for Strahd. What we had is one of the callback things that you had done for us in our Strahd game was before we had anything like really serious happen, we had a callback to training at school. Right. And you presented combat to us in a way that was combat, but incredibly low stakes combat.
Yes.
Right. And the way this went was basically he went back to our training and pitted us in pairs because there's 4 of us players. Right. So he paired off the 4 of us to fight each other in an arena in a class setting. So the teacher was teaching us how to use our abilities and how to fight each other and how to do stuff in combat. So incredibly low stakes because 1, it's a flashback. We know we're all still alive.
Right.
We know we're not going to kill each other. We're at a school. It didn't really matter. 2, we didn't have to worry about, abilities and burning skills and action economy and sweating out this whole combat of like doing things exactly right to min-max the way the combat was going to go. Because we knew that it was incredibly low stakes. This was just a flashback. So it allowed us to do things that were silly or something that you wouldn't actually do in a real combat because now that there's stakes. Like if I'm in a real combat, I'm not going to give my opponent an advantage in any way, shape, or form, right? Because who's going to give your opponent an advantage? And in my flashback, I gave my opponent bardic inspiration
When they missed you.
when they missed me. It was fun and it was great. And it was a thing that I thought up like right in the middle of combat. And I was like, this is going to be cool as a narrative beat. And I'm totally going to reference this later down the line. And I love it being able to put that in there as in like a way for me to play, like have a playful moment with a party member in a memory that just shows who my character is and how they are with them and like how they grew together to know each other. So low stakes combat like that is really, really cool. And I think that you can include combat in these session 0 campaigns because you can do it like that. You can have something like a battle that doesn't really mean a whole lot, but can allow neat moments to happen, and it doesn't have to be a combat with a creature or something like that, or it could be. I mean, you could have, you and your friend have a, a combat with, something run of the mill, like a wild boar that ran through your camp one night and is trying to ravage your food. And now you have this, struggle of the ages to try and protect the apples from the boar, and it doesn't have to be high stakes combat, but it's memorable combat. And it's a thing that you're going to reference down the line.
There's so many ways to take that too, where it could be some big thing that maybe you don't defeat it, or you do, like you band together as youngsters or something, and you do take this thing down, and maybe it comes back.
Yeah.
Or you've encountered this thing, and maybe it actually beats you, but you're not murdered. I think a big part of a Session Zero campaign is, if you're the DM, this is not where you're killing your players. This is characters, and back to the low stakes. You can make the combat engaging and fun, but never actually put the characters' lives in jeopardy in this, because this is character creation still.
Yeah.
You're making informed decisions to write a backstory together. This is not the game in the sense of... So I TPK'd my players at level 0.
At level 0. I know you killed yours in your first game. Try doing a Session 0 campaign and murdering before they, right when they meet each other.
Yeah.
They're in preschool and the whole thing gets just run over by a rampant carriage with bombs in it.
They each had 1 hit point.
They all had 1 hit point.
Yeah.
I made him trip on a marble and he broke his neck.
Yes, I think that's a big thing. You
Yeah, don't do that. This is the other thing, though, too, with a children's campaign or a Session 0 campaign like this.
Yes.
You mentioned when we were talking about the Curse of Strahd thing, and you were all like, we did the low impact, and how much you enjoyed it as a DM, because you got to... You basically put a bunch of rules in front of us, not a bunch of rules, but a couple rules in front of us, and you're all like, so I want you to come up with a bond and a flaw, right? 2 bonds and a flaw. And then you sat back and you watched us play and you watched us do this stuff. I think that a children's adventure or a campaign, 0 session campaign, could be a very hands-off DMing experience, which allows you to see how your players are going to interact and actually help you in your game to come, because you're not going to have to put too much effort into this, this Session 0 campaign, because really what you're doing is you're setting a stage, right? So you kind of got to come up with some very basic stuff like you would have with any prepping session or whatever. But I think a lot of it is putting a little bit more on your players' back, to come up with these things and play these characters out. And if you listen to the children's adventure, Brandon does a really brilliant job of describing the scene and then setting the scene, and then they get into really weird shit. Stuff happens that I'm not sure that Brandon anticipated always happening. So he set a stage for them to be children in, and then they were children during that. And they did children things, and maybe a lot less hands-on as a DM.
You said a couple of things there that I actually connected in my own way, which I think maybe you intended too, where he set a scene, and they were children. I connected these two things in, yes, he set a scene. He set the town that they were in, because they're children. They weren't going anywhere else.
Yeah.
All he had to do was focus on this and beautifully narrate the environment, and they got to literally play in it and just focus in on the characters and developing their story, and then build the world out from that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're full-on adventurers, you're going from location to location to location to location. And even now, and so many episodes into the Wizard of the Witch of the Wild One, they're referencing Lohan the baker.
Yeah.
The baker who would show up and show Ursulon how to fight with a sword. This is how this character learned how to use a sword. A baker would show up and show him some ropes every once in a while.
A baker who wasn't even a good swordsman.
Yes.
He just thought that he was an okay swordsman.
But that's such a organic character moment. And for that to come up is so fun. And that's just like, all he had to do was focus on this town and this house.
Yeah, this
and
one section.
Some residents.
And then everything builds from there.
In the forest.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Like you going back to the pirate thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were going to do that as your session 0, you have to, as a DM, write the ship. Right? So you're talking about the ship, the crew, where it's going, what its job may be.
The crew. Know every member of that crew.
Maybe an island
yeah.
that you guys stop on. Right?
Maybe another ship comes up at some point.
And that's really it.
Yeah.
So that's what you're doing, is you're setting that stage. And then from there, depending on what your characters do, maybe you have to expand a little bit. But I think it's a lot easier to let your players kind of run with it and then expand and build upon what your players come up with in your sandbox that you created, that tiny little sandbox, because it's not a big one. It doesn't have to be a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, we're full on pirates. Show us the map.
Yeah.
What islands can we choose from?
Yeah. Where can we go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's such a fun thing. And like I said, that session 0 we did for Strahd, I loved it. I thought it went great. I was surprised at how enjoyable it was, because like I said, I hadn't done anything like that before, and I plan on forever at least doing something similar. But I fully intend on running a session 0 campaign for our homebrew campaign that I've been working on.
Yeah.
That I plan on running after Strahd. Because I think a homebrew world is perfect for a session 0 campaign like this, where, like you said, you can focus on a spot, get to know the characters, then fine-tune the world to the players and the characters.
Yeah, to the players and the characters.
Instead of me, I build a world, I build it how I want it to be, and maybe it doesn't mesh 100%. I'm putting, square pegs in round holes, where I could, you've got a square peg, I'm going to make a square hole.
Yeah.
And it's the same world, but reshaped to fit you. And so that's it fully what I have already rewriting the beginning of this campaign in mind to not be set in stone for the introduction anymore, and setting something back. We'll see. Are we looking at children? Are we looking a few years earlier, weeks earlier? We'll get there. But I am already shifting the beginning to be moldable, so you guys can tell me how you want it to be based on your actions. And I'm just even more excited, because it was such a fun experience listening to this session 0 campaign. I want to play it myself.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't have the experience of being a DM in this situation, like you did with Curse of Strahd and the little tiny thing that you did. But I did listen to, Children's Adventure, and I did participate in that.
That's the thing. You were a player.
I participated
in one of these.
I was a player, and I think, at least I get the feeling, that it's not just a different way to approach things and a fun way to approach things, but it's almost like another tool for a DM to get to know your players, because like you said, you're already changing your idea of how this world is going to work, because you almost have to, right? Because you don't, when you think about it and you really break it down and you're all like, okay, I want to do, if it's going to be a module or it's going to be a homebrew, whatever your next game is going to be, right? You don't really know much about your characters that you're playing in there. You might know a little bit, because you might have your group of 4 people and you've already talked to them, and you have the one that's going, I'm playing a barbarian, and the other one who's like, I'm going to be a druid. And then the other one's like, I just listened to the UA for, paladins, and that's what I'm going to do, because that's what I want to be. So, generalized stuff. And then you have, the one character who is all like, it's a desert campaign, I'm going to be a fish person who has to be in water every 5 minutes.
And you're like, do you have a second character sheet ready to go?
Yeah. So you have that much knowledge, right? Yeah. But then beyond that, you're just looking at your module, or you're looking at the homebrew that you're running, and you have this idea of the story that you want to tell, versus doing a campaign 0 and really having a second to step back and watch the players play, and then you get to see what these players actually are. So you get to see how they interact with each other. You get to see how they interact with different things that you throw at them, different scenarios that come up. And that does, change the way that you look at your campaign. I would almost guarantee it. It has to, because you look at these players and you're like, I didn't know what I was in for, right? Because you're all like, yeah, I knew that you designed, this type of character, right? So you looked at my character sheet and you saw, oh, he's designed this person named Trist, who is a bard, who is non-binary, who is going to use tarot cards to tell, stories, basically, to use their College of Spirits ability. That's what you know. And then you set us in school and you let us interact with each other. And within like the first, 10 minutes of Trist interacting with everybody, your first comment was, 2 years of this. because all you knew what was on paper. You didn't know what Trist was as a character.
I didn't know Trist.
You had the backstory that I wrote, but you're just reading a backstory that somebody wrote. I didn't tell it to you. I didn't read it to you. If I had read it to you, then you would have had a little bit more of an idea of what Trist was going to be. But instead, you got to hear it from the interactions that I was doing with the other characters as you introduced them. So now you get to see what Trist is as a person. And now you have a better idea of the choices that Trist is going to make during their adventure. And that's probably going to change the way that you approach certain scenarios during Strahd. Because maybe I'm going to do something that is going to be different than what you would expect of a different character. And you might be able to adjust or change the way things move or how the campaigns work. So it is, I'm not the DM, right, in this instance, and I've only heard these things, and I was a player during it. But I do think that a Session Zero campaign like this is an excellent tool for a DM to see their characters that they're going to be playing in this long-term campaign with and how they're actually going to interact with each other. Makes it a more deeper experience for everybody involved.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I was speaking of the homebrew campaign, working on this. Very much could be applied to modules as well. Like I said, I wish I had done this for Strahd proper. Though the one was good. A few sessions, it would have been glorious. It speaks to me out the gate as, wow, this would be fantastic for a homebrew world, because you're making everything up in any way. So you get your characters, you can tweak everything. Now you can still do this with the module. You're a little more confined. Now you're the DM. You can change anything you want, but maybe you don't want to. I don't know. Homebrew campaign. I fully intend on doing this going forward. Now, if we start out Waterdeep Dragon Heist, maybe I won't. It's not a super long module to begin with, and I don't know if it makes as much sense to do a full-on campaign zero, whereas a session zero would probably do more than suffice.
Would cover things, yeah. I guess it depends on what you're looking for out of a game.
Yeah.
Like, if you're looking to start a long-term campaign with a group of people, or you're looking to not necessarily start a long-term campaign, but a long-term career for these characters. What I mean is that you expect these characters to be around for a long time and not just for, a short time, like, for a small module where you're only going to see these characters once. Then I think that Session Zero campaigns are definitely a cool thing that you should look into doing. It's not going to fit everybody's way of play, for sure, and not necessarily going to fit every single module that's out there, because you probably, like you said, for a shorter module or something that's going to be like a one-shot kind of a situation, you don't need to have an 8-hour prequel.
One-shot? No way, yeah.
Yeah, you don't need an 8-hour prequel of these characters. But if it's a character that you're looking to play a very long campaign with, or like I said, you're looking to play multiple campaigns through, these are characters you expect to be around for a long time, then maybe a Session Zero campaign is something that would be interesting to you.
That's a fun idea. Multiple campaigns, same characters. Yeah, I agree. Yet again, I agree. The longer you're planning on spending with these characters properly, the more it makes sense to me to do this campaign zero.
Yeah. because it can only serve to greater deepen bonds, flaws, and character development.
Yes.
Which is not a bad thing, especially if you're playing multiple campaigns with these characters. Their characters are going to be around for a very long time. Sure, you can make the argument that being around for a long time, you're going to build this stuff anyway. But this is just a more organic way to approach it. And I think it makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun for everybody involved, honestly, because you get to really develop these characters in a way that feels natural and makes it just feel more fun for everybody around the table.
Yeah.
Now, so we've established our rules, right? So if you're going to do a session 0 campaign, try and keep it narrative heavy, combat low stakes.
There we go.
Make sure that you're sufficiently gimping your characters out of the gate. You don't want everybody to start off with all their abilities, right? You want everybody to start out lower stats.
You're not an adventurer yet.
Few abilities. Don't give them their entire spell list right out the gate.
Or maybe any spells.
Maybe you haven't learned how to use magic yet.
Right.
You haven't learned how to use a sword or a knife yet. So figure out a way to make their characters as normal as possible, right? And then build yourself a substantial yet smaller world. So nothing super expansive, just something that's big enough to have a playground in.
Feels lived in.
Yep, feels lived in. And then let your PCs kind of explore as they will. And I would say try and let them do as much as they can so that you learn more about them. That's my take on things. That's my rules or my suggestion for a session 0 campaign.
I feel like the biggest thing the DM has to worry about here is the world building. Make sure you've got that location set in stone. Like, you know, every character, every detail you can think of that they might interact with there, just so that it all feels real. Like, this is the place. You can describe it all on the spot. You're not making this up at this point. This is home. This is where we live and breathe, and this is where we're going at. I would recommend that as DM. You just got to worry about this one spot, especially if it's for a few sessions. 2, make sure your hooks are solid. You got to pull in your characters. They got to meet for the first time. Make sure this is 100%. It makes sense on how you're going to get all of your players to the same area so they can meet in the first place. And 3, the stick to get them away. Potentially. Maybe they all stay as a group from this point on and they become adventurers together. They make the gang with the mystery machine and they're going out looking for ghosts and spirits and stuff. But if that's not the direction you're going, you want them to separate and then meet up again later, a la Children's Adventure. Make sure you know how that's going to go too. You have your starting and your end points. At least potentially figured out. That's how I would go about it. And then everything Richard said. Because he hit the beef of it. Other than that, my closing thoughts would be this was really cool. I had a fantastic time listening to the Worlds Beyond Numbers Children's Adventure. It actually changed how I look at a session 0 and a session 0 campaign type of thing for D&D, where I wouldn't have never even considered something like this before. It was my favorite thing they've done so far. And I'm absolutely influenced by it. Richard, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, my closing thoughts are this did change my brain chemistry when it came to Dungeons and Dragons, because I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of Dungeons and Dragons. None of it was the Children's Adventure. This was a new approach that took something that we all know and something that I've listened to so many times and flipped the script in a way that I didn't expect or think that I needed, but now has completely altered the way that I look at session 0s. It has changed my brain chemistry in the approach of character creation and how things interact, and it has set a very high bar, one that was hit with the mini session 0 in Strahd. That scratched the itch, and was perfect and could only get better. So yeah, this is something that I think is excellent. Love it and want to see so much more of.
What they did was special, and like you said, it's changed my mindset on this. And I hope other groups start pulling this kind of thing into their games at home as well.
Yeah, I'd spend the $5. Go listen to the children's campaign. It is worth every penny and all the time. So it's not a huge investment,
either financially or time.
Yeah, it is. It is
so
well
quick.
worth it. It goes quick, and it. I think you'll have a really strong opinion about it after you listen to it. And I think that a lot of people are probably going to be the same camp as us. It's something that you didn't know that you needed.
Right. But till next week, I've been Tyler.
And I've been Richard.
And we've been True Strike. Hey, adventurers. Thanks again for joining us today. Please be sure to give us a follow on your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. If there's any questions you'd like to write into the show, you can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram. New episodes release every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening to True Strike.
Dude, were those cats killing each other?